The first person to recognize me wasn't my parents. It wasn't the mayor. It wasn't even the reporters crowding outside City Hall. It was the man everyone in town had spent 12 years calling a hero. He froze the moment our eyes met. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked terrified. His attorney leaned over and whispered something into his ear. He didn't respond. He just kept staring at me as if he'd seen a ghost. Outside, television cameras lined the sidewalk. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in over a decade stood behind police barricades, waiting for the hearing to end. Some of them still believed I was the girl who had tried to ruin a good man's life. By the end of the afternoon, every one of them would know the truth. I stood quietly at the end of the hallway, holding a thick binder against my chest. Inside were 12 years' worth of documents. Witness statements, medical records, police reports, emails that had been hidden, and one recording that should have changed everything years ago. My phone vibrated. Mom calling. I stared at the screen until it stopped. Then another call. Dad calling. I ignored that one too. A text message appeared almost immediately. Please, don't do this. I laughed softly. Don't do this? 12 years earlier, I'd begged them to say exactly the opposite. Back then, I was the one asking them to believe me, to listen, to stand beside their own daughter. Instead, they chose him, a man the entire town admired, a decorated firefighter, the face of charity fundraisers, the first person everyone called whenever disaster struck. To them, he was proof that good people still existed. To me, he was the reason my life fell apart. Looking back now, I should have realized that no one wanted the truth. Not the police, not the newspaper, not my parents. Because the truth threatened something people valued more than justice. Hope. Every small town needs someone to believe in, and ours had chosen the wrong man. The courtroom doors opened. The bailiff called everyone's names. As I stepped inside, I saw my parents sitting behind the man they'd defended for over a decade. Not behind me. Never behind me. My mother looked like she'd been crying for days. My father couldn't even meet my eyes. The judge took his seat. The room fell silent. Then the clerk announced that newly discovered evidence had been admitted into the record. I watched the color drain from the so-called hero's face, because he finally understood something I had known for months. The lie my parents sacrificed me to protect was only seconds away from collapsing. But to understand why my own family chose a stranger over their daughter, you have to go back to the summer when everyone in town believed they had found a hero, and I became the only person who knew he wasn't one. I grew up in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. If your car broke down, 3 neighbors would stop before you even reached for your phone. If someone got sick, casseroles appeared on the front porch before sunset. People liked to believe we were the kind of town where good people always won. I believed that too. My name is Hannah Brooks, and for most of my childhood, I thought I was incredibly lucky. My father owned a small hardware store on Main Street. It wasn't the biggest business in town, but it had been in our family for nearly 40 years. Dad knew almost every customer by name. My mother taught 3rd grade at the elementary school. Former students still stopped her in grocery stores to thank her. Growing up, I thought my parents were the kindest people in the world. They taught me to tell the truth, to admit mistakes, to help people, even when no one was watching. My father had one saying he repeated almost every week: "Your reputation follows you longer than your shadow." At the time, I thought he meant your reputation should be built on honesty. Years later, I realized he meant something very different. As an only child, I spent a lot of time helping at the hardware store after school. I stocked shelves, swept the floors, helped elderly customers carry bags of soil to their cars. Dad always smiled proudly. "You're going to make someone very happy one day." I wasn't trying to impress anyone. Helping people simply felt right. My dream wasn't complicated. I wanted to become a physical therapist. When I was 16, my grandmother broke her hip. Watching her learn to walk again fascinated me. I loved seeing how patience and encouragement could give someone their independence back. From that moment on, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I studied harder than anyone in my class, worked weekends, saved every paycheck. Scholarships became my entire focus. College wasn't just a dream. It was my way out of a life where money was always tight. My parents couldn't afford tuition. They reminded me of that often. We'll support you however we can, Mom would say, but you'll probably have to earn your own way. I never blamed them. They were doing their best. By my senior year of high school, everything seemed to be falling into place. Good grades, volunteer work, strong recommendation letters. I was even accepted into a summer internship at the county rehabilitation center. Life finally felt like it was moving in the right direction. Then, Ethan Cole became the most admired man in town. Ethan was only 10 years older than me. He'd grown up a few streets away before joining the fire department. When he returned after several years away, local newspapers couldn't stop writing about him. He had rescued children from a house fire, pulled people from flooded homes, organized charity drives, visited schools to talk about courage and community service. To the town, he wasn't just a firefighter. He was proof that ordinary people could become heroes. My parents absolutely adored him. Whenever Ethan appeared in the local newspaper, Dad would clip the article and tape it to the bulletin board inside the store. That's the kind of man this country needs more of, he'd tell customers. Mom invited him to speak to her students during Fire Safety Week. The children loved him. So did everyone else. I thought he seemed nice enough. Friendly, confident, always smiling. Whenever we crossed paths at community events, he'd wave. "How's college planning going, Hannah?" "Pretty well," I'd answer. "I hear you're going to do great things." Little conversations like that made me think he was exactly who everyone believed he was. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention to the moments when his smile disappeared. The way he looked over his shoulder before answering certain phone calls. The strange arguments I'd occasionally overhear outside charity events. The people who suddenly stopped talking whenever he walked into the room. At the time, none of it seemed important. I was too busy planning my future. Too busy believing that good people were rewarded for doing the right thing. I had no idea that before summer ended, one ordinary evening would destroy everything I had spent 18 years building. And the people I trusted most would become the first to turn against me. The night everything changed started like hundreds of other summer evenings. I had just finished my shift at the rehabilitation center and stopped by Dad's hardware store to help close. Business had been slow. Dad was counting the register while I swept the front sidewalk. The annual Founders Festival was happening downtown, so most people were gathered around Main Street. Music echoed through the air. Children ran between food trucks. The smell of grilled barbecue drifted through the neighborhood. It felt like the kind of night people remembered fondly years later. Around 8 o'clock, Dad locked the front door. "You heading home?" "In a minute. I promised Mrs. Jenkins I'd drop off those garden tools." He smiled. "Don't stay out too late." "I won't." I waved as he drove away. Instead of going straight home, I decided to walk through the festival. It was only a few blocks. Besides, I'd been studying so much that I hadn't seen many of my friends lately. Near the town square, I spotted Ethan. He was standing beside the charity booth, surrounded by people asking for pictures. Children climbed onto the fire engine parked nearby, while parents thanked him for his service. He smiled for every photo, shook every hand. Exactly the man everyone believed him to be. I smiled to myself and kept walking. About 20 minutes later, I took the shortcut behind the community center. It was quieter there. The music from the festival faded into the background. That's when I heard shouting. Not playful shouting. Angry shouting. I slowed my steps. A man yelled, "You said nobody would find out." Another voice answered, "If you keep talking, we'll both lose everything." Something about that second voice sounded familiar. I moved closer without making a sound. The alley was dimly lit. Behind the dumpsters stood Ethan. He wasn't smiling anymore. Across from him was a young man I recognized from town, Kyle Mercer. He worked part-time at the local recreation center. Kyle looked terrified. "I just want what's mine," Kyle said. "You promised." Ethan stepped closer. "You should have kept your mouth shut." Kyle shoved him. It wasn't a hard shove. More frustration than violence. But what happened next froze me in place. Ethan punched him. Once. Then again. Kyle stumbled backward and hit the concrete wall before collapsing onto the ground. Blood ran down the side of his face. I gasped. The sound escaped before I could stop it. Both men turned toward me. For a second, nobody moved. "Hannah?" Ethan's voice sounded completely different. Calm. Calculated. He walked toward me slowly. This isn't what it looks like. I looked past him. Kyle was struggling to stand. His lip was split. His left eye was already swelling. I saw everything. You don't understand. I understand enough. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling 911. His expression changed instantly. He grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to leave bruises, but hard enough to stop me. Hannah, listen to me. Let go. You can't call. Why not? Because this will destroy lives. I stared at him. You should have thought about that before you hit him. Kyle finally pushed himself off the ground. He looked at Ethan with fear I couldn't explain. Then, without saying another word, he ran. Actually ran. I frowned. Why would the victim run away? I started after him. Kyle! He never looked back. Within seconds, he disappeared into the darkness. Ethan released my wrist. You see, he doesn't want the police involved. I glared at him. That doesn't matter. I'm still calling. I dialed 911. Ethan didn't try to stop me again. Instead, he quietly said something that didn't make any sense. I hope your parents believe you. The police arrived within minutes. So did half the town. Apparently, someone at the festival had heard shouting. 2 officers questioned me first. I told them exactly what I'd seen. Every detail. No exaggeration. No assumptions. Just the truth. Then Ethan gave his statement. He looked shaken. His voice cracked at all the right moments. Hannah must have arrived after Kyle attacked me. I stared at him. What? I tried to calm him down. That's a lie. He looked at me sadly. I understand why she's confused. Confused? I watched you hit him. Several people standing nearby exchanged uncertain glances. One officer frowned. Ethan has visible injuries too. I looked closer. His knuckles were scraped. His shirt had a small tear. Of course they were. He'd been in a fight. That didn't prove he was innocent. Then the police found Kyle. He was sitting on a curb 3 blocks away. When they asked what happened, he looked directly at Ethan, then at the growing crowd, then quietly said, "It was my fault." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What? Kyle refused to look at me. I started it. The officer turned toward me. Miss Brooks, it appears you may not have seen the entire incident. I saw enough. Ethan lowered his head. I don't want Hannah getting blamed. That sentence changed everything. Within minutes, people began whispering. Maybe Hannah misunderstood. Maybe she arrived too late. Maybe Ethan really was trying to stop a fight. The hero. Or the 18-year-old girl. Who would people believe? I still thought the truth would protect me. I had no idea. My own parents were about to answer that question. And their answer would destroy every ounce of trust I'd ever placed in them. I expected my parents to believe me. Not because I was perfect. Because I was their daughter. That night, after the police finished taking statements, we drove home in complete silence. Dad gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Mom stared out the passenger window. Neither of them asked if I was okay. Neither of them asked what I had seen. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Dad turned off the engine and spoke without looking at me. Tell us exactly what happened. Relief washed over me. Finally, they wanted the truth. I told them everything. Every word Ethan and Kyle had exchanged. The punch. The blood. The way Kyle had run away. Even the strange sentence Ethan whispered before the police arrived. I hope your parents believe you. When I finished, I waited for one of them to say they believed me. Instead, Dad sighed. Hannah, I think you misunderstood what you saw. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so unbelievable. What? Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. Honey, Ethan has spent years helping this town. So? He saved lives. I know. He volunteers every weekend. I know. He risked his own life during the apartment fire. I know. I pulled my hand away. What does any of that have to do with tonight? Dad finally looked at me. People don't become monsters overnight. I stared at him. And witnesses don't invent assaults overnight. He rubbed his forehead. Kyle admitted he started the fight. After Ethan spoke to him. We don't know that. I do. You weren't there. I was there. No. You arrived after it began. I watched Ethan hit him. The room fell silent. Then Dad said something that shattered my heart. I trust Ethan. More than me. He didn't have to say the last 3 words. I heard them anyway. The next morning, the story spread across town. Not the truth, the version people wanted to believe. Young volunteer falsely accuses local firefighter. Misunderstanding at Founders Festival. Hero cleared after witness confusion. Someone posted it on social media. Hundreds of comments appeared within hours. Ethan has done more for this town than most people ever will. Kids these days just want attention. She should apologize. I stopped reading. Then my scholarship advisor called. Hannah, we've received several concerns. What concerns? They're saying you're involved in an incident currently being investigated. It's a misunderstanding. I hope so. We'll have to wait before finalizing your recommendation. My stomach dropped. One accusation. One rumor. Years of hard work suddenly hung in the balance. 2 days later, there was a community meeting at Town Hall. Officially, it was meant to clarify misunderstandings. Unofficially, it was about protecting Ethan. The room was packed. Teachers, business owners, neighbors I'd known my entire life. When Ethan walked in, people applauded. Applauded. I looked at my parents. They clapped too. Dad even stood. For a second, I wondered if I was dreaming. The mayor welcomed everyone. Then he invited Ethan to speak. I've never wanted attention, Ethan began. I only wanted to serve this community. His voice cracked. If someone misunderstood my actions, I forgive them. Forgive them? Forgive me? I stood up. That's not what happened. Every head turned toward me. Ethan looked down sadly. I understand she's emotional. I'm not emotional. I'm telling the truth. Then my father stood. Hannah. His voice was firm. Sit down. No. You're making this worse. Worse for who? The whole town is watching. I don't care. I do. Those 3 words echoed through the room. I care about what's true. So do I. No. I looked around at everyone staring back at me. You care about believing the easiest story. Nobody spoke. Then my mother walked toward me. She took my hands. Her eyes filled with tears. Honey, please, just apologize. My heart stopped. What? You don't have to admit you lied. Just say you misunderstood. So everyone can move on. I pulled my hands away. You want me to apologize? To the man who assaulted someone? Mom whispered. We need to protect our community. I stared at her. What about protecting your daughter? She couldn't answer. Because there wasn't one. Looking back now, I realized that was the exact moment I stopped feeling like part of my own family. I was no longer their child. I had become an inconvenience. An obstacle standing between them and the version of the town they wanted to believe in. I refused to apologize. I walked out of town hall alone. Behind me, I heard the applause begin again. Not for me. For Ethan. Within weeks, everything unraveled. My scholarship offer was suspended pending character review. The rehabilitation center quietly ended my internship. Customers stopped coming into Dad's hardware store whenever I was working. Parents told their children to stay away from me. Some nights I found anonymous notes taped to our mailbox. Leave our hero alone. Stop lying. Then one evening, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. Dad's voice was barely above a whisper. Maybe she'd be better off leaving town. I froze. Mom answered quietly. Maybe that's the only way people will finally move on. I covered my mouth to stop myself from crying. The people who were supposed to fight for me had decided it would be easier if I disappeared. And as devastating as that realization was, I still didn't know that Ethan had been hiding a secret so explosive. It would eventually bring the entire town to its knees. 3 weeks later, I packed everything I owned into the back of my 15-year-old Honda. 2 suitcases, a box of textbooks, a coffee maker my grandmother had given me for graduation, and the framed acceptance letter to the university that no longer wanted me. I stood in the driveway for a long time. Not because I expected my parents to stop me, because a small part of me still hoped they would. Dad carried my last box to the car. Mom folded her arms tightly across her chest to keep from crying. Neither of them asked me to stay. Dad finally cleared his throat. I think this is best. For who? He looked down. For everyone. Everyone. That word hurt more than I expected. Apparently, everyone didn't include me. I hugged my mother anyway. She whispered, I hope someday you'll understand. I wanted to tell her she was asking the wrong person for understanding. Instead, I simply said, I hope someday you'll know what it feels like to not be believed. Then I got in my car and drove away. I didn't look back. Not because I wasn't hurting. Because I knew if I looked back, I might not have had the strength to leave. Chicago became my second chance. At first, it didn't feel like one. I rented a tiny apartment above an old bakery. The floors creaked. The heater barely worked. My bedroom was so small that my desk touched the foot of my bed, but no one there knew my name. No one whispered when I walked into a grocery store. No one looked at me as if I had betrayed the town. For the first time in months, I could breathe. College wasn't easy. Without the scholarship, I worked nights at a rehabilitation clinic cleaning therapy equipment and weekends serving coffee. There were weeks when I survived on instant noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. There were nights I cried from exhaustion before falling asleep over anatomy textbooks. More than once, I thought about giving up. Then I'd remember the night at town hall. The applause. My parents asking me to apologize. And I'd open my books again. Pain became fuel. Looking back now, I realized that leaving home didn't just save my education. It saved my identity. If I had stayed, eventually I might have started believing the lies people told about me. Years passed. Slowly, life began to resemble something hopeful again. I graduated near the top of my class, accepted a position at one of the best rehabilitation hospitals in Illinois, eventually became director of patient recovery services. The work fulfilled me in ways I never expected. Every patient who learned to walk again, every family that smiled through tears after months of uncertainty. Every small victory reminded me why I'd chosen this career in the first place. Not because people always appreciated honesty, but because helping others never required public approval. During those years, my parents and I spoke only on birthdays and Christmas. The conversations never lasted longer than 5 minutes. They always ended the same way. We miss you. I know. You should come home sometime. I'm not ready. Neither of us mentioned Ethan. It was as if saying his name would reopen a wound everyone preferred to pretend had healed. Then, 12 years after I left town, something happened that shattered the silence. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while reviewing patient files, my office assistant knocked gently on my door. Hannah, there's someone here asking for you. I don't have an appointment, he says. She hesitated. He says you saved his life. I frowned. I've never met him. She stepped aside. A man walked slowly into my office. His face looked older, thinner. His left eye carried a faint scar. For several seconds, I couldn't place him. Then he smiled sadly. Hannah, it's Kyle. Every memory from that summer night came rushing back. Before I could say a single word, he quietly added, I've spent 12 years trying to find the courage to tell you the truth. In that moment, I knew my life was about to change all over again. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. Kyle looked nothing like the frightened 20-year-old I remembered. His shoulders were broader. There were streaks of gray in his hair. But his eyes, they carried the same guilt I had seen the night he ran away. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said quietly. I wouldn't forgive me either. I slowly closed my office door. Sit down. He remained standing. I've lied to myself for 12 years. I think I should stand. Neither of us smiled. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me for more than a decade. Why? He closed his eyes. Because I was a coward. Silence settled between us. Then he began. The fight you saw. It wasn't random. I figured that. Kyle nodded. Ethan had been stealing money from the charity foundation. I frowned. The firefighter relief fund? And 2 children's charities. My stomach tightened. No. He handled fundraising. He handled the accounts. And everyone trusted him. Every word felt heavier than the last. I found discrepancies while helping organize donation records. You confronted him? I asked questions. Kyle laughed bitterly. I thought he'd explain everything. He didn't. What happened? He offered me money to stay quiet. And when I refused, Kyle touched the scar beneath his left eye. You saw the rest. I sat back in my chair. So why did you lie to the police? His face crumpled. Because he threatened my family. He said if I reported him, people would believe I'd stolen the money. He already had fake documents prepared. I stared at him. He planned all of it? Kyle nodded. And he wasn't bluffing. He showed me forged bank records, fake emails, fake receipts. He said he'd destroy my parents before anyone believed me. Looking back, everything suddenly made sense. The strange phone calls, the whispered arguments, the fear in Kyle's eyes. He hadn't run because he was guilty. He had run because he believed there was no way to win. But why now? I asked softly. Why come forward after 12 years? Kyle reached into his backpack and placed a thick folder on my desk. Because someone else finally found the money. I opened it. There were forensic accounting reports, Banktransfers, copies of canceled checks, offshore account records. My pulse quickened. This proves everything. Kyle nodded. Not everything. He reached into the folder again. This does. He handed me a flash drive. What's on it? Ethan's voice. I frowned. What? About 6 months after the fight. He got drunk. He called me. I recorded the conversation. My hands started shaking. You recorded him? I was afraid no one would ever believe me, so I kept it. For 12 years. I plugged the flash drive into my computer. Kyle looked away. I've never listened to it again. The recording began. At first, there was only static. Then Ethan's unmistakable voice. You should have taken the money. Kyle answered quietly. You ruined her life. Several seconds of silence. Then Ethan laughed. A laugh I'd never heard before. Cold. Arrogant. Nobody was ever going to believe some teenager over the town's hero. My heart pounded. The recording continued. Her parents were easier than I expected. I froze. What? Kyle remained silent. Ethan kept talking. I only had to remind them what would happen if the town lost faith in me. My breathing became shallow. They convinced their own daughter to stay quiet. Saved me a lot of trouble. The recording ended. Neither of us moved. For 12 years, I'd believed my parents had simply made a terrible mistake. The truth was even harder to accept. Ethan hadn't just fooled them. He had manipulated them. He knew exactly which fear to exploit. Their fear of becoming the family that destroyed the town's hero. Kyle finally spoke. There's more. I looked up. What? The state attorney reopened the charity fraud investigation. They've traced almost $4 million. To Ethan? Yes. And Kyle took a slow breath. They want you to testify. I stared at the evidence covering my desk. 12 years earlier, I had stood alone while an entire town called me a liar. Now, I held enough proof to destroy the man everyone had protected, and my parents were about to learn that the truth they sacrificed their daughter to bury had survived without them. The courthouse looked much smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had finally outgrown the fear I'd carried for 12 years. As I walked up the front steps, reporters called my name. Not because they thought I was guilty anymore. Because they wanted to hear the woman no one had believed. I didn't stop. I'd spent enough years explaining myself to people who had already made up their minds. Inside the courtroom, Ethan sat at the defense table. His hair had turned gray around the temples. The confident smile that had once won over an entire town was gone. For the first time, he looked like an ordinary man. Maybe that was his greatest punishment. Heroes can survive criticism. Ordinary men cannot survive the truth. When I took the witness stand, the prosecutor asked only one question. Miss Brooks, do you recognize the defendant? Yes. How? I watched him assault an innocent man. The courtroom fell silent. No one interrupted. No one rolled their eyes. No one asked if I had misunderstood. For the first time, people simply listened. I described everything. The alley, the argument, the punches, the threat, the police interview, the community meeting, the apology my parents begged me to make. Then the prosecutor played the recording. Ethan's own voice echoed through the courtroom. Nobody was ever going to believe some teenager over the town's hero. Several jurors lowered their eyes. One woman in the gallery quietly began crying. The prosecutor then introduced the financial records. Millions of dollars diverted from charity accounts. Forged documents. False reports. Hidden transfers. The local hero everyone had defended wasn't just guilty of assault. He had stolen from children, disaster victims, and the very community that worshipped him. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, Ethan didn't even look up. The foreperson stood. We find the defendant guilty. Anebi won. Every count was read aloud. Fraud, embezzlement, witness intimidation, assault. The judge removed his glasses and looked directly at Ethan. You spent years building a reputation that inspired trust. You then used that trust as a weapon. Before sentencing, Ethan was given the opportunity to speak. He slowly stood. For a moment, I wondered if he was finally going to apologize. Instead, he turned toward me. I'm sorry your life was affected. Affected. Not destroyed. Not stolen. Affected. Even then, he couldn't admit what he'd done. The judge interrupted him. I don't believe you're apologizing to the victim. I believe you're apologizing because you were caught. Those words hit harder than any prison sentence ever could. A week later, I returned to my hometown for the first time since the trial. Main Street looked almost exactly the same. Except for one thing. The newspaper box outside the diner. The front page headline read, "Local Hero's Decade of Lies Exposed." I didn't buy a copy. I didn't need one. The truth no longer belonged only to me. It belonged to everyone. As I walked toward my parents' house, I noticed the old newspaper clippings were gone from the hardware store window. The bulletin board where Dad had proudly displayed Ethan's photographs was empty. Dad opened the front door before I could knock. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. Without saying a word, he stepped aside. Mom was already crying. The three of us stood in the living room in complete silence. Finally, Dad whispered, "We failed you." Not. "We made a mistake." Not. "We were confused." He chose the right words. "We failed you." I nodded slowly. "Yes, you did." Mom covered her face. "We thought we were protecting the town." I looked at both of them. "You weren't protecting the town. You were protecting the story you wanted to believe." Dad's voice trembled. "Can you ever forgive us?" I thought about the 12 birthdays they had missed. The graduation they hadn't attended. The years I spent wondering why my own parents chose someone else. Then I answered honestly. "I forgave you years ago." Hope flickered across their faces. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Their smiles faded. "I lost 12 years with my family. You have to live with knowing you gave those years away." Neither of them argued. Because they couldn't. Some debts can't be repaid. They can only be acknowledged. And for the first time in 12 years, my parents finally stopped defending a hero and started mourning the daughter they should have defended all along. People often assume the happiest day of my life was the day Ethan was convicted. It wasn't. Justice brought peace, but it couldn't give me back the years I lost. It couldn't erase the loneliness of moving to a new city at 18. It couldn't return the scholarship I never received. It couldn't replace birthdays, holidays, and family dinners that disappeared because my own parents chose to believe a stranger instead of their daughter. Those years are gone forever. Today, I still work as a physical therapist. Every day I help people take their first steps after injuries that once seemed impossible to overcome. It's funny how life works. For years, I thought I was the broken one. Then I realized the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who refuse to let someone else's lies define who they become. My parents and I have slowly rebuilt a relationship. Not the one we used to have. Something quieter. More honest. Trust grows back much more slowly than love. If there's one lesson my story taught me, it's this. Never mistake popularity for character. The loudest applause doesn't always belong to the best person. Sometimes the truth stands alone for years before anyone is willing to hear it. But truth has something lies never will. It doesn't need to be remembered perfectly. It only needs one chance to be heard. And when that chance finally comes, no reputation is strong enough to stop it. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you for being here. Now I'd love to hear your opinion. If you were in Hannah's position, would you have stayed and kept fighting to clear your name? Or would you have left town and started over, like she did? Do you think her parents deserved forgiveness after choosing a stranger over their own daughter? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story brings a different perspective, and your experiences may help someone else who feels unheard or misunderstood. If you enjoy emotional family drama, revenge stories, and true-to-life storytelling about betrayal, hidden secrets, justice, and second chances, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We publish new stories every week. Stories that remind us that truth may be delayed, but it doesn't disappear. Until next time, take care of yourself Trust your instincts, and remember, the people who deserve your loyalty will never ask you to sacrifice your integrity to protect their image.